everybody. This is Justin.
And Kristen.
And this is Cloudy with a Chance of Therapy. Sorry we've been missing for a little bit. Just stuff's been going on. We're getting back into it. But today, we have a very special guest, our first guest of the podcast. So I want you all to be nice to her. But we are talking to our very good friend, Sara Blevins-O'Tool. She is the Director of Development at Branch's Domestic Violence Shelter in Huntington, West Virginia. We've known her for a long time, and she's awesome. So I'm gonna. So for this episode, I'm gonna leave this up to Kristen and Sara, because they're the experts.
Before you dash off, though,
yes.
What's been going on this past couple of weeks?
Oh, everything.
Gestured broadly.
Yeah, we had a death in the family, so that's been rough. And had one episode give us some technical issues while we were trying to upload it. So
yeah, the sound got scrambled, so we had to completely re-edit it. So it just kind of wrecked it for both of us. Any media that you've consumed the past couple of weeks that you want to share?
Actually, especially for this podcast, on Webtoons is a webcomic called Batman Wayne Family Adventures that is very cute and deals a lot with kind of the like healthy, like people having, obviously the Batman family having some bad coping mechanisms, and then the rest of the family helping them deal with it. It's a lot of fun. I deeply suggest it, and I've just started back up because it took a little bit of a hiatus there.
So, for context, because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we are going to be talking about domestic violence. So couple of different things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how domestic violence affects those who work with victims and some of the reality of what domestic violence is. So, but before we get into all of that, Sara, is there any media that you've consumed? And I also want you to kind of share a little bit about what you've been doing the past couple of weeks, because I know that October is kind of a crazy month for you.
First off, hi, Sara.
Yes. Also, feel free. Also, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Justin already did such a great job. My name is Sara Blevins-O'Tool, and I work for Branch's Domestic Violence Shelter. I've been a certified domestic violence advocate for the last 5 years. It's one of my most cherished parts of my identity. I really love what I do. Of course, it's very difficult, but it does give me a lot of opportunity to talk to people about their experiences and to really get to kind of look at our society from a lens that not many people get to see. And so I do really love what I do. I love that we're opening up talking about media, because I have just recently really gotten into a couple of new books. My husband has really gotten me into the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. I am loving that, really enjoying it so much more than I thought I would. I did not know that there was a genre now that was like RPG lit. And so that has been very interesting. Sometimes it's a little challenging for me to read, but just really, really good stuff. I'm enjoying it a lot. And then for my own pleasure reading, my girl T. Kingfisher just came out with a new novel, Silver and Hemlock, and it is so good. Although now I'm going to have to fact check myself, because I think it might be Hemlock and Silver. So BRB, fact checking.
Didn't you say that was kind of a retelling of Snow White?
Yes, a very, very cool twist on Snow White. This particular character, this main character, and just do keep in mind I'm only about halfway through, is like a poisons expert, and she is extremely scientific. And so one of the things that I have found to be kind of an interesting take is that when she falls into the magical element of the tale, she doesn't believe it, and she is like constantly trying to find the scientific explanation for it. And it's such a, like, I don't know, it's such a cool take for a character in a fantasy series to be having this experience. For posterity's sake, it is Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher.
Okay. So, what is it about Fisher, TK Fisher's? Is it TK or T Kingfisher?
T period Kingfisher.
Okay. So, what is it about their writing style or the way they tell their stories that catches your attention so much?
Oh, I can't even describe it. So, I it's not even my favorite series that they've done is not even the first thing I read by them. That my favorite series that they do is the Paladin series, and essentially it's a series of books that starts with a god dying, and all of the paladins kind of go insane at the beginning of the book, and then it's a series, each book following a different paladin, about what happens to them after this crisis of faith where their god dies. And the thing I love the most about her is that you never see her heroine or her hero coming in the way that you expect. So, like, for example, the main character of this novel that I'm reading, she's in her 30s, described as being a woman of size, with no apology about that. It just is what it is. She's the heroine. Sorry. So, yeah, so everything about her characters is unexpected, or it's not what you typically see. The very first paladin in the Paladin series, his name is Stephen, and he is battling with a lot of PTSD from being on the battlefield the day his god died, and he like knits socks constantly to try to keep himself sane. And you don't normally see that with a hero of a romantic story. And so I really love the humanness of her stories.
I also think it's interesting that she gave her hero a what is considered typically a feminine or domestic skill. Like, it
Yep.
makes sense for someone who would be on the battlefield to be able to darn or knit their own socks, because they wouldn't necessarily be able to run to a general store or what have you in the world and be able to buy something. And, as someone who does crafting, there is a stress relief to it. So I find it interesting that an author who is writing a stereotypical masculine character gives them a a typically feminine and very domestic skill. So I find that very interesting and very what you were saying about not expected. So I like that.
Mhm.
I know you've been
Another
recommending
cool
these books to me for a while, so
so good. I can't describe how good they are. Um, she Another cool thing about that particular series is that the first couple are between hetero relationships, and then all of a sudden, right in the middle, there is one of the paladins who's gay, and it's his love story with the doctor. He's not a doctor. He's oh Lord, help me, Kristen. A doctor for the dead. What is that called?
mortician.
Mortician. Yes. He's a mortician, and he does autopsies for them. Now, the romance storyline is not at all the main storyline of these books. It's a very fantasy-driven, magical problem
Right.
storybook. Um, but the romances are really, really good too.
Right.
Not not super spicy. It would be like appropriate, I think, for people who were not interested in a lot of spice.
So that's good. Would you say similar spice level to the Apprentice books series?
Yes.
So another
Yeah.
series that we have read jointly as a group is I refer to them often as the of the villain series, because she hasn't given the series like an overarching title, like Harry Potter series or the Lord of the Rings series. But the first one is called Assistant to the Villain. And very similar to how Sarah was describing the Paladin books, there is a romance aspect, but it is not the primary storyline. It is a story thread, but it is not the primary, and it is not. It is very slow burn. They are some of the best novels I've read in a very, very long time. Very funny, very smartly written. Again, highly recommend those. So,
One more thing I'll say about T. Kingfisher, if I haven't already convinced you to read her books, which I hope I have, she, a lot of times her characters, particularly her female characters, when it's from their perspective, have a kind of very real, very relatable stream of consciousness where they're like, why did I say that? Why did I say that? Why do I forget words in the middle of my sentence? What, like, it's very, very real. And I think that is a really cool element of her novels as well.
there's an internal monologue that gets shared with the audience that we all just kind of assume the characters don't have. That's cool.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess I kind of want to ask, what has been the, if you had to dispel some myths when it comes to domestic violence situations, what would you say are probably the most common top 5 myths that people don't necessarily understand about domestic violence?
Oh, I have so many. Where will I start? Let's see. I think that we're still very entrenched in the idea that domestic violence happens only to women. And we know that it happens all across the gender spectrum. It can happen to anybody, any social class, race, any demographic. It's one of the most insidious things about domestic violence. So I think that's a big one that I would try to dispel. The one that I think is the harder or more subtle myth to dispel is that people still think that you can, like, lift somebody up out of a domestic violence situation, put them in a shelter, and then the problem is over. Like, there's a clear ending to the problem. And in my experience, from a mental health perspective, from a financial perspective, from a custody perspective, that is just not the reality of the situation. It has long-term impact. It has long-term effects that do not have a clear-cut ending. I would say very similar to the way that people perceive grief, that there should be like a deadline for grief. People think that there should be an end to the domestic violence problem. And there may certainly be a clear-cut end to the violence, but there is not a clear-cut end to the aftermath.
So, when you are trying to explain to somebody what the reality, someone who has never been in a domestic violence situation, the reality of what a victim experiences, how would you try and explain that to someone?
I would say, imagine that you're juggling 17 red balls and someone throws in a machete. That's what I would say. So you don't get to drop any of those other balls. You don't get to stop helping your kids get ready for school in the morning or get dinner on the table or go to work. But now you also have to manage this incredibly unpredictable, life-altering situation as well.
Okay. So, what do you think is the hardest thing for people to understand about domestic violence?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Um, I think sometimes the hardest thing for people to understand is why their loved ones can't just leave the situation, or why it's so difficult for them to just walk away from a person that harms them. Um, I think that typically we have a hard time comprehending or understanding the depth of coercive control, and so we find it very easy to cast judgment on why someone wouldn't want to leave someone they love.
Well, it's not necessarily the way I've kind of always personally understood it. It isn't necessarily a desire necessarily to leave. It's also an inability to leave. Often they
Yeah.
are often they are isolated, not only socially but fiscally. If they have a job, they may not have access to the income that they make from that job. There's a lot of, I think it's the control aspect that a lot of people struggle with understanding when it comes to domestic violence. Like, a lot of people like to be like, oh, the first time somebody hit me, I'd leave. But what a lot of people don't understand is there's that whole coercive control isolation aspect that you don't feel like you have anybody that you can lean on. They've made you feel like you can't trust anyone, even your own self, to make judgment decisions. I think that to me is what a lot of people, for me personally, in my experience working with people outside of the domestic violence umbrella, I guess, for lack of a better word, is it's that lack of understanding that it is not, one, it's not a one-time thing, and two, that there's more to it. Like you said, that coercive control, like the control works because they have torn you down over so long that you're in the basement. You have to have someone to give you the safety to be able to start building back up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also an element here of it's really important to remember that this is not someone that is random or not unimportant in your life. This is a person that you love,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really confusing. It's confusing that the person who loves you is treating you this way. I think sometimes I don't want, I want to be really careful not to too much generalize the experience of DV, because every survivor is as different as there are people. So some survivors are ready to go. They want to be done with it. They want to get away from that person. They want to send that person to jail. Other survivors want to get away, but they just want to be left alone. They don't want to follow any type of pathway to traditional justice. Or sometimes they want to work things out. They want to be like, hey, I would like this person to get, I'm going to use the word anger management, though I want to be very clear that that is not the answer in most cases for domestic violence folks.
Support or mental health services of some sort.
Yes, yeah. I think there has been a long time conflation with, oh, people who cause harm in relationships need anger management, but it's not an anger issue most of the time. It's a control issue.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that the people who want to work it out with their abuser, often they have children. Often, that we like to think about everything as being very cut and dry. It is either black or it is white. And in the reality of every situation, like people, it's complicated, and there are these wide shades of gray that we have to be able to see, because like you said, every situation is different. And I think the important thing is to always remember that when you say things, like when you're outside the situation and you say things, I would just leave, it would be easy to leave, you downplay the struggle and reality of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Also, the sheer courage.
Yes.
Something I really that really gets under my skin in a way, or something that I struggle with, is that I really hate it when people make assumptions about victims of domestic violence, that they are weak or that they are somehow a certain type that is targeted. Certainly, a person who wants to cause harm is going to look for certain traits, right? They're going to look for vulnerable populations. However, we know scientifically that the time when a survivor is leaving the situation is the most dangerous time for them. That's when that abuser is going to start acting erratic. They're going to start behaving in unpredictable ways.
And
they
be the most violent.
Kill.
Yeah, and it's,
what? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, it's when they're going to be the most violent.
Right. So most survivors are most likely to be murdered or harmed around the time that they're trying to leave. So it takes incredible courage to do that.
Yeah.
And then when you know that it takes 7 to 9 times for a domestic violence victim to fully leave a situation. Imagine getting the courage to do that 7 to 9 times and to keep trying. I think rather than weakness, that is incredible strength.
Yeah. And I think, like Branch's shirt, the chronically is chronically rooted in resilience this season.
Yeah, so we do have t-shirts for sale on Bonfire. They say chronically resilient, and they have a cute little brain on them. Um, I would love to share a little bit about behind the reason why that we chose this kind of theme. So yeah, it's about how many times it takes to leave domestic violence, how chronically resilient you have to be. But it also is meant to highlight a very special subpopulation of domestic violence victims, which is that of those who are living with a traumatic brain injury. TBIs are very, very common with victims of domestic violence, and like so much more common than people understand.
Yeah.
I recently had the real privilege of going to a training with someone from the WVU Neuroscience Center. And Morgantown, West Virginia has a fantastic neurohealth center that is dealing specifically with traumatic brain injury. And they offer free services to domestic violence victims that have been victims of a traumatic brain injury.
That's
And
fantastic.
he's incredible. He is wonderful. Um, he was just a wonderful person to meet. I am struggling to remember his name, so I'm going to fact check that in just a second. I can see his face very clearly. But one of the things that he shared in his presentation that has probably, I promise you, it's one of the things that has been haunting me for the last month. He pointed out that in the sports world, he specializes, or he started out in sports medicine,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in sports like football, right? There is a standard scientific limit of head injuries that is like, okay, enough's enough. You can't play sports anymore, and that is 3. If a athlete gets 3 brain injuries of any kind, then they're out. Right? That's
Mm-hmm.
what's recommended. That does not exist for domestic violence victims. And he was saying that when he interviews domestic violence victims, it was shocking to him because he would be talking to people, predominantly women, who were coming in with not 1, not 2, not 3, but upwards of 15 and 20 head injuries in their lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so we work with some clients that have traumatic brain injuries. Their resilience is so incredibly special to me that we really wanted to do this fantastic T-shirt to honor their experience and to promote sort of their power and their ability to endure.
That is one of the things, like, so we understand, like, from a PTSD perspective, in mental health, that TBIs can, like, literally rewire, almost to a personality level, who you are. Especially, like, soldiers that have experienced IEDs, or law enforcement officers who have experienced like car wrecks, or like building firefighters that have experienced building collapses and things like that, and have experienced those kind of severe TBIs, to the point of having on top of that PTSD diagnosis, that you need to be like the awareness of they can have things like blackouts, personality changes. But I think we are so far behind in the mental health aspect when it comes to helping victims of domestic violence. It is heartbreakingly sad and astronomically frustrating. Like, and I'm a weird, like, like, I have special classes in working with victims of loss and trauma. We didn't have as many domestic violence classes as I would have liked, Anyway.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to clarify, the person who is doing that research is Dr. Cardenas, and he is with the WVU Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute, and he is that particular program is the one that is providing this free therapy to domestic violence victims in the state of West Virginia.
That is phenomenal. Phenomenal. Especially when you think about how little our state is, like population wise, finance wise. We are a little have not state. Like we struggle with something. So it's when you hear that we have someone who has seen a need and is focusing on that need, it's so refreshing to not be the state that's tossed out with the bathwater, so to speak. You know what I mean?
There is a client that I have worked with for many, many years now who has a traumatic brain injury, and she is so unbelievably special to me. Sometimes she just calls and needs to check in with someone. So we can't really do anything for her. We're not offering her new services, but we just have a conversation with her and check in and see how she's doing. And the work that she has had to do, in addition to all of the other things that every other survivor has had to do, is like truly inspiring to me. So I was really, really happy when we were able to pull together this t-shirt idea.
Yeah, because it's not just a awareness shirt. It represents someone who you know their story. You can, when you put that shirt on and you see it in the mirror, you can be like, this represents so and so. This is so and so's story being told. Or when you see the shirt out in the wild, so to speak, you're like, that person doesn't know it, but you're showing someone that their story matters. You know, and I think that is so unbelievably important. It's showing that, because one of the things that I have been working on in my personal therapy is talking about how it can be difficult for victims to share that narrative. We want to share it. We want to talk about what we have been through. But if you don't know that the person you're talking to has a similar experience or has walked in your shoes, so to speak, it can be extremely difficult to share that. So I think that having those shirts out there can show safeness. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I would be remiss if I didn't shout out that we have a few other
Absolutely.
items in there. We have a great bonfire store, I'll be honest. If you're unfamiliar, Bonfire is just an easy way to do fundraising campaigns for the nonprofits that you care about. You can design t-shirts and sell them at cost, and the excess or whatever you upsell them for, you get that as your fundraising aspect. So we have, if you are kind of a Halloween girly or a Halloween person, we have some really adorable shirts right now for Halloween that just say relationships shouldn't be scary, which is our motto. And they are really stinking cute. So if you like those, they're also there, and they're just so freaking cute.
So I think one of the other things that I think it's really, really important to address, especially when it comes to working with victims in this time of, especially this time of month, is secondary trauma, or in therapy we call it vicarious trauma. So I know from my experience working at branches specifically and answering the hotline and things like that, that it can be very easy to take that home with you every day. So what are some things that you do in order to make sure that you also remain resilient and encourage your coworkers and staff to remain resilient as well?
Well, first of all, thanks for asking that. I think it's important that we are mindful of ourselves as we work through trying to help others. So one thing that I have been really, really lucky to be a part of and to do so much of is that I play kind of a big part in training other advocates. I do a lot of training across the state. I do a lot of training within our own agency here in Huntington. And I think that even though it's not immediately apparent, when you dive into it, training is a huge part of burnout prevention and care for yourself. Training will help you feel confident and not afraid. Hold on. I'm sorry, let me back up. I got a notification on Discord that it wanted to connect to my phone microphone, which I don't want it to do.
No worries.
Okay. So, though it's not very obvious, I do think that training can be a really big part of avoiding vicarious trauma. I do want to say one other thing about that. As a person who has a survivor experience of my own and a relationship with advocacy, I think you have to train yourself not to expect your experience from every survivor you talk to. And that can be really, really hard to do. Also, I'll just be real with you. I have a very deep and meaningful therapy practice of my own that I am very intentionally consistent with because I don't have all the answers. I don't know how you don't take this work home. I still take it home. Take it home all the time. I don't know how you don't think about it at all hours of the night when you're really, really busy and stressed out and you have a case that really gets to you. I think that if you try to remove that, then you are removing the humanity of working one-on-one with someone and connecting to them in a way that is not a power dynamic. So I'm grateful for that. I like that sometimes I still take it home. I do have a lot of things in place that help me personally to cope with that. I do want to say that if you are in a field where you want to be an advocate, I highly recommend that you sort of interview that field first and get a feel for how they address it as a field. So what I mean by that is that I have been super, super lucky to work at Branches because we have a director that is really passionate about making sure that all of our advocates prioritize their wellness. So much so that we actually even switched to a 32-hour work week last year. So for about a year now, every single full-time staff member does a 32-hour work week to help maintain their wellness.
So you talked about you have a personal survivor story, and I'm not going to ask you to share that unless you want to, and that is completely up to you. However, you said that it can affect how you view other victims. And how have you, I guess, trained, for a lack of a better word, yourself to give other victims the space and grace that and the understanding that their experience and process is not the same as yours?
Okay, so I actually developed this as one of the very first training exercises that I do with any advocate we hire. So this is in new hire training. And it feels like it's like one step away from what you're asking, but if you give me a minute, you'll see that it gets to it.
Sure.
So what I had to do was to start training myself to essentially assess everyone's values in the room when I go into a situation where someone might disclose their survivor story. So my values are going to be radically different from another person, any other person. Everybody is operating with their own sense of values. And our values really dictate how we're going to respond to domestic violence. So let me give you a really big example of this. I know many people, I would say, based on our 20-year friendship, that you're one of them, who really, really value a sense of justice, of right and wrong. That is a wonderful trait to have as an advocate, right?
I would think so.
Okay. It can be problematic, though, for new advocates when they meet someone who does not want to report anything that has happened to them. They're not interested in a traditional view of justice. And sometimes that can feel very frustrating. I've worked with many advocates who are like, "Oh my God, I don't understand. Why would they lie to police? Why wouldn't they show up to their court date?" All of these things. It's because that's not what they value. And when you expect them to do that, you are expecting them to behave as though they value what you value.
Right.
And so one of the things that has been really helpful when I trained myself was to be very mindful that oftentimes when a survivor is not behaving in the way that I think they should, is for me to step back and say, okay, is this because this is rubbing up against some kind of value that I have? And I'll give you one that's a personal one for me. So a value that I have that I'm very strong about is that I really, really value resilience. I value resilience in all people. And sometimes when a survivor comes in and like feels very hopeless and they just want to give up and they want to lay down and never get up and try, that feels really, really difficult for me to handle. I can get really upset with that. And the great thing about having a network of advocates, what you do about that is that you just say, hey, maybe I'm not the person to help this person. But Shannon, my friend, who is also a 15-year advocate, is wonderful to handle that. She's not going to have that, like, not that she doesn't value resilience, but she's not going to have the same response that I do. So sometimes it's really good to just not take it personally. You might not be the right person to connect with that. It's very similar to finding a therapeutic relationship.
That's exactly what I was about to say, is understanding that you as the client have the ability, you have the right to find the person who fits best with you. I want to follow up on something that you said. I think the people who get stuck on the why wouldn't you want to go to court and why would you lie, they get stuck on not the justice aspect but the punishment. There is a difference between wanting justice and thus safety versus wanting the bad guy to be punished. And I think there is a vast difference between that. And I think sometimes people get stuck in that idea that justice means punishment. Justice doesn't mean punishment. Justice can mean safety for a lot of people. And for victims of DV especially, that justice for them may be having a safe place to go, knowing that that person isn't going to be able to find them again. And having a trail of papers, like going to court and getting a DVP and things like that, leaves a trail because they have to leave a forwarding address because that person has to know where they can't go. So it can make them easier to find when you just want to disappear.
Yeah. I would also point out that justice can be very small. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a survivor just wants the person causing them harm to acknowledge that they did something wrong.
Absolutely.
They don't want anything else to happen to them. They don't want them to get in trouble, in quotes. Yeah. They just want them to acknowledge that they hurt them.
Yeah. What, in your experience, what would you say is the most common response for victims when it comes to, let's say, air quotes, justice? Would you say that they want, like, what is considered a true punishment, or they just want that acknowledgement of wrongdoing?
You know, to be very frank with you, justice is such a nebulous concept for so many of the people that I work with that I don't think there is a common. I think it's so individual.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
Like, I would say, again, that acknowledgement of wrongdoing, I think, is one thing. I think sometimes justice is, like, has nothing to do with the person. Like, actually what I mean is that for some people, justice is being so unafraid that they never have to think about that person again. Like, it's like that they don't exist.
Yeah.
They don't have to be afraid of them. That's justice for them.
The freedom to be themselves again.
Mhm.
What would you say is the most difficult part of advocacy? Or
That's a great question.
if you have to, like, if there's not a single answer, which I highly doubt there is, what would you say are the, let's say, top 3 most difficult parts of advocacy?
For me, let me clarify that this is for me, my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think other people are much better at this than I am. There is something that we kind of call systems advocacy, which is like, you know, how are survivors treated in the justice system? How are they treated in the CPS system, in the uh, mainstream benefit system, all of that. So there can be all kinds of systems. And we look at that. We try to ease the way in these systems for people. And sometimes that can be really challenging. Um, People do not realize, or I don't think that many people who are lifetime dedicated service providers have done tons of great work. They don't realize that they're still carrying these judgments and these inherently victim blaming tendencies. And so it can become problematic. And so I really struggle with that. I am not the one to handle that. You want somebody else at our agency to handle that. So I think that's difficult. Um, I think that knowing that you are going to have to look at a victim sometimes and say, there's literally nothing else I can do. And that is really heavy and really hard. And then I would say that working with children who are secondary victims of domestic violence, not even just the children who have directly experienced the violence, but secondary victims. I've never met a case with a child involved that was easy. I've never met any domestic violence case, let me be clear. But for me personally, I've become very connected to the children of these cases.
Going back to the system advocacy that you mentioned, what would you say is the hardest bias that you come across?
I think now is a good time for me to say that these are opinions of me and not the opinions of Branches Domestic Violence Shelter Inc. But I would say
You speak for yourself,
that,
not the company at the moment.
yeah, I am speaking only as Sarah and my experience, not as someone who works for Branches. Um, I think that there are inherent challenges when working with child welfare systems because, and this is very, I want to be very clear about this. Domestic violence advocates and child welfare services have two very different jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that. Their job is not to look out for the victim in the situation. But because they are often only looking at harm to the child, they often create really intense barriers for domestic violence victims that I just do not think are fair.
Yeah. It was not uncommon for when I was there, and I don't know if this is still a common thing that you hear, for victims to be worried that they were going to lose custody of their children for coming to the shelter because they had heard that they would.
And also, it has changed a lot. It has changed so much. We've come such a long way with CPS in particular. But there was a time that they would.
Now, for context, listeners, I worked at Branches in 2010. So Branches has a new director, new staff, and things have changed in the system vastly since then. So these are, but that fear still is prevalent. And I think that
I've done, at this point, probably hundreds of intakes for clients. And they almost always, when you get to the part where you ask them if the children have been part of the abuse, they almost always say no because they're scared that they're going to be responsible for that.
And I think it goes back to that, mandated reporting, understanding that certain organizations are mandated reporters. And it's like, okay, well, if I say yes to this question, am I going to lose my kids because they're mandated reporters? And,
Hmm.
you know, it, that's
I also want to be very clear that we're not condoning violence against children
no,
and by any means. Like,
no.
obviously, we want the whole family to be protected.
But when I ask that question, because that becomes a barrier for the victim seeking safety.
Hmm.
When we talked about why victims don't leave, that is one of those reasons. Because
Oh, yeah.
if they have children with their abuser, you know, they don't want to run the risk of losing their children, because that is they a very real fear for them,
Hmm.
and that is a very, very sad state. um what would you say are other barriers that you notice victims really struggle with when it comes to getting back on their feet?
Oh, it's housing.
Housing.
There's a really great novel by, it's not a novel, it's a book of essays by Mickey Kendall called Hood Feminism. And in Hood Feminism, she has an article that starts out by being like, housing is a domestic violence issue. And I could not agree more. Um, Here in the community of Huntington, we are sort of in the middle of a housing crisis. There isn't a lot of housing to go around. There isn't like housing is very costly. Exactly what we're facing in different places across the country. For domestic violence survivors, most of them have left a very violent situation. They're living impermanently in a shelter situation, and we're trying to get them into safe, permanent housing. And we have a really great track record of that. We have several really great programs that help with that. But if the housing's not there, it's hard to find it for them. If it's not there, it's not there.
Would you say that with the housing crisis, just to bounce off of that, that it is we struggle with not having enough lower income availability housing, or rent controlled lower income housing, or if you just think that there's a housing issue in general?
I think it's all of it.
Okay.
I think all of it contributes, I guess, is what I would say.
Okay.
Um, and we have really worked hard on developing relationships with landlords and people that would be willing to rent to survivors of domestic violence. And we have some great landlords in our program that help us out. It's just that there is such a need.
So, too much of a need and not enough housing to go around.
Yeah, I definitely think that's part of it.
Okay. So, if housing is the biggest barrier to overcome, what would you say is probably the one that victims think is going to be the biggest barrier that turns out to be, I don't want to say easiest, because nothing in this situation is easy, but the, let's say, least difficult for them to overcome?
Hmm. Never thought about this before.
Or
I
one that I
guess
guess surprises them is less difficult to overcome than they expect.
I guess what I would say about that is that I'll go with the one that most people don't know that we have,
Mm-hmm.
which is like we provide an awful lot of practical support. So we have we provide a lot of food boxes, we provide a lot of clothing, we provide a lot of laundry services. So some of those everyday things I would say are easier to overcome than people think.
Okay. I didn't, so I knew about the food boxes and the clothing because those were things that were offered when I worked there. I didn't know about the laundry services. That is fantastic. Is it something that victims can come in and like use the laundry and like washer and dryer, or what is that exactly?
Yeah, It's people who have stayed in the shelter. If they've gone on to permanent housing, they can sometimes come back and do some laundry during the day. It just works on like a sign up
Okay.
sheet.
So, what are some things that you find that people who get into advocacy are, especially like with domestic violence, that are surprised they struggle with? Find more difficult than it's like, oh, I can manage A, B, and C, but I'm worried about D, E, and F. And then they're like, when they actually get into it, they're like, oh, that thing that was completely not on my radar is something that I really struggle with.
From an advocate's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I think I think many people come in thinking that the emotional toll is going to be the hardest part. And let me be clear, it's hard.
Yeah.
And also advocacy is not for everybody. So it might just be straight up something that is not for you. And that's okay. It's cool to try it and find out and move on to something else. I think what people do not expect is the time management component. Like, when I say that you are always working as though you are in crisis mode, it's not an understatement. You are always adjacent to someone else's point of crisis, which means that you are always doing something.
What would you say was that you had the biggest learning curve?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would have to think about that, I think. The thing I'm struggling with right now, personally, is like employment law.
Okay.
It's hard to know what state sanctioned rights that survivors of domestic violence have, because you have to really know the technical law to be able to help them, like, to be able to provide advocacy for a survivor whose employment might be in question because of their experience.
So is that something that you feel like you struggle with a lot, like not struggle with as from an app? Hold on, let me rephrase this. Is that an issue that you feel like plagues a lot of victims? Like they are at risk of losing their job because of their victim status?
Yeah, 100%. The current U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that annually in the United States alone, that there are 8 million paid days of work lost to domestic violence issues.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are you noticing as the issue facing victims when it comes to employment? Like, is it just threats for job abandonment or job loss? What are you noticing that the issue is?
First of all, I would like to say thanks for asking me what's the hardest part for me and then asking me a lot of questions about it. But here's what I know because I've recently studied it. I think that what we're seeing the most is that like benefits of time off are become an issue because you have, like, courts are held, like, custody proceedings, court proceedings are held during work time. So
Yeah.
you have to get that time off. And if you don't have that time off, that could cause you to lose your job, right? A lot of times abusers, in, like, for someone who's in an active domestic violence situation, abusers will sabotage employment. And so you'll see things like calling the office constantly, showing up to the office. In fact, I read one statistic recently that said something like the majority of instances of workplace violence can be traced back to a domestic violence incident.
Wow. Okay. So it's almost like they're being fired because it is easier than trying to protect them or support them.
I can't speak for employers, but that's certainly what it feels like.
Fair enough. So
I would say also a really interesting thing that happens is that the um, the survivor or the victim is afraid to disclose what's going on with them because they don't want their performance to be reflected poorly, right? They don't want people to know about it and to gossip about it and to then think that their performance is suffering because of it. And so oftentimes that's an additional barrier to even seeking out what rights they have employment wise. They may even work in a system or for a business that is very supportive of survivors, but they would never know it because they don't want to disclose and they don't want to ask about it.
And I think
So,
that also goes back to the feelings of isolation that a lot of victims experience, um, because of how the abuser isolates them, and making them feel like they can't talk to anyone. And then you add on top of that the trauma of the abuse, making you feel like you can't communicate with anyone.
right. I will say that one of the initiatives that we've launched at Branches recently, just this year, is a grant funded program that I felt really privileged to have received. We're calling it Better, Building Trauma Responsive Communities. And we essentially are working directly on these systems advocacy issues. So what that means is that we are going into businesses, we're going into faith-based settings, we're going into um, neighborhoods and service providers, and we're training them how to be more trauma responsive to survivors. And one of the things that we straight up offer to businesses is that I can come in and help them draft workplace policy in support of survivors. So we're seeing a lot more interest in that. In fact, if you're local, Valley Health Systems was one of the first businesses to reach out to us to do that. And they launched an entire workplace policy in support of employees that are survivors just this year.
That is awesome. So, what are some things that you are most proud of when it comes to watching your, through the process of advocacy, watching that, the victim to survivor?
It's a great question. Um, hmm.
Unpaused.
So, if you're asking me what makes me proud of survivors
Mm-hmm.
from start to finish, um, I think any moment in which they step into their power. So that can be anything from opening a savings or checking account for the first time to um, coming to like arriving at a big insight in support group. It's totally dependent on the person, but there is often a moment in that transition from point of crisis to healing from domestic violence where they begin to step into their power. They begin to see that their experience has made them stronger and that there is going to be a future on the other side of it. And I always feel like a real surge of pride for them. Another occasion in which I feel a lot of pride is that no matter how many times I see the same client come back to the shelter, every time I see them trying to leave that situation, I feel a big surge of pride.
Because you understand the difficulty of it. But you also, I think for me, even though they were coming back, they understand that the shelter and Branches as an organization is a safe place. And I think that is so important for victims to know, that there is always a safe place for them there. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Oh yeah, that is definitely our hope and our mission and our goal.
Yeah. So I know that October, with it being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, is a very, very big and busy month for you and the shelter as a whole. So, what are some things that you have had going on this month, and what are some things you have yet to do this month?
Okay, so as you know, Domestic Violence Awareness Month is sort of a big time for me because I do a lot of the planning for our outreach. Um, one of the coolest things that I'll share with your listeners is that we have been operating a podcast for the last 4 years. It's called Root for Each Other, and if these topics, the nuances of domestic violence, interest you, it's a great follow. You can find it wherever you stream your podcast. And one of the coolest events that we did this month, I did just Tuesday afternoon. It's called Power and Privacy in Relationships. I'm sorry, excuse me. It's called Power and Privacy, Tech in Relationships. And it is a live podcast recording from Marshall University. It will be our October podcast episode, and that should be up sometime early next week. So that was a great event. It was a really good one. We also had the Better Communities Advocacy Summit, which brought together about 67, I said about 67, it brought together 67 community stakeholders from all of those different pillars of the community to start the action planning process for building trauma responsive communities, or I'm sorry, building trauma responsive systems into our communities. A couple of other things on the docket for me this month. Personally, I'm experiencing a moment of personal pride. I am the 2025 Diane Reese Advocate of the Year award winner.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It is really humbling and so special to me to follow in the footsteps of Diane Reese, who was a pioneer of advocacy in West Virginia. And just unbelievable that they would think enough of me to nominate me for that award and to win it. It's just an incredible honor. So I have a luncheon next week where I will be sharing my thoughts about that and sharing that moment with several other award winners from across the state. And that day happens to be Wear Purple Day. If you want to wear purple on October 23rd in support of survivors and post a selfie and tag branches, that's something that you can do to celebrate Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And then that is really about it, all that we have planned for the month. Although we do have a really active social media account and following on Facebook and Instagram. If you follow Branches, you'll see that we are constantly posting new events and content geared towards survivors.
The podcast end card will have all of the Wear Purple Day and all of that details. So that will be up there on our the end card for the podcast. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
The only thing that I would say is that, we end every episode of Root for Each Other with this sort of mantra of like, hey, go out there and root for each other. And we really mean that. If you are experiencing domestic violence or you are in a situation where you feel like, hey, something's not quite right in my relationship, reach out to us. We want to hear from you. We want to help. You can call us anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, completely confidential, completely free of charge, at 304 523 oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I have to edit that out. I messed up the number. Oops. Oh, panic.
Did you about to give the main shelter number?
No, I messed it up because I was so focused on it. Okay, please edit that out. That part, I'm going to start over. If you are experiencing domestic violence, we sincerely want you to reach out to one of our advocates at 529-2382, area code 304. And you can reach that number 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, completely free of charge. All of our services are confidential. I also want to share with you a couple of other ways to get connected with us. We essentially, everyone always thinks that if you call us, you have to request shelter. That's absolutely not true. If you have had a domestic violence experience that you're still processing, but do not need emergency shelter, you can call us and schedule an appointment with our crisis counselor. You can also go to our website, www.branchesdvs.org, and sign up for our virtual support group. It's a really easy way to connect and to work consistently with a group of folks who have a shared experience.
All right. So I want to say thank you to Sarah again for spending her evening with us today. This podcast will be up hopefully 10/17/25. I do apologize for the gaps this week. Like Justin and I said earlier, October's been kind of a rough month for us personally, but thank you again, Sarah, for your time, and we appreciate you greatly, and we appreciate everything that you and the rest of the lovely folks at Branches do for everybody in the community. It is one of the most important and I don't want to say utilized, but understood services the people don't realize we need more of in this area. I think that it's kind of like mental health when, it's like, oh, it's needed and important, but kind of one of those things that you don't realize how important and needed it is unless you know someone who has experienced it or if you've experienced it personally. So,
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity so much.
I appreciate you, and I hope everybody has a wonderful night. And as I try and say every week, take what resonates, leave what doesn't. And if you need mental health services, please reach out in your area. You can reach us by email at cloudywithachanceTherapy@gmail.com. And the end card will have all of Branches information and the hotline number as well. So have a wonderful night.